Thank you. So we would like to welcome you to this open book session called PoC at the Table, an exploration of culture, identity, and food rooted in the Cape. I'm Ishay Govender-Ypma, and joining me, my fantastic panelists, Abigail Mbalo, who is a chef and a social entrepreneur, and she is behind Forum Kasi Kitchen in Khayelitsha, as well as an array of other businesses. Tazneem Wentzel, who is a historian and a cultural curator, and she wrote a fantastic thesis that looks at biopower, wheat, the Gatsby bread, also rooted in the Cape, and Fatima Sydow, who is a Cape Malay cookery expert and who has a cooking show by the same name of her book, which you know is available next door at the Homecoming Center. And she runs that with her sister, twin sister, Khadija. So welcome. Yeah. There is simply no way that we'll be able to cover all the things that interest and fascinate us about this topic related to culture and identity. So we've narrowed it down, but there will be a moment towards the end for you to participate, if you like, and to ask some questions as well. You know, this topic is quite loaded. We always say that food is political. So on that note, you know, for many people, and particularly marginalized people, food seems to have played a very central role in our memories of our home and our links to our culture. And if you think about it, in the Cape, where colonization in South Africa was born, this is particularly relevant. But at the same time, you know, many of us grew up in circumstances of poverty. There was poverty around us, but there was also abundance. So I thought maybe we could speak about a food memory that roots you to the Cape. Abby?
If you talk about that we grew up in an era where poverty was around us, but with my memories, I don't remember being poor because that's where we found comfort around food. So at home, there was always cooking at home. So one of my memories will be my mom's cooking, like slow-cooked food on weekends. Everyone is in the kitchen cooking umngqusho, which is like your sampan beans and some curries. And for a long time, I always tell this joke that I thought curries were actually a black person's food. And it's actually not. It was not, because that's what I grew up on, living in Guguletu. But if you look at it, it was actually the influence of other cultures living in the Cape, in a township, and with the diversity that we have in our spaces. So I have those fond memories around food, yeah.
And you spoke to us as well about literally a bridge between Guguletu and Manenberg.
Yes, that's a very interesting story. So when I opened my restaurant, I had this old man from Mitchell's Plain that visited. So I was talking about the stories about the curry thing again. And he says, you know what? Because people always found a way to connect with each other. But the very interesting or sad story was that there was a gate between Guguletu and Manenberg on the side. And you had to show your dom pass. And there was a curfew time that you're not allowed at a certain time. People from this side, that is the black people and the colored people, you were not allowed. If you caught on the wrong side, that you'll be in trouble. And I remember sometimes my mom would be worried that my brothers are not home at a certain time, then they might be in trouble. But you know what, as people, we found a way to connect with each other. And food is probably a way where we actually communicated with each other, and hence my curry memory.
And there are so many instances of this cultural sharing, and some of it is shrouded because we just simply don't document them, and some of it we don't speak about.
Yes,
a lot of it we also just take for granted, you know, like the curry story, curry being a township dish, which it is in its own right. Tazneem, would you like to share some of your food memories?
Well, one of my earliest memories is that my mother she's a very good baker. She makes wedding cakes, she makes chocolate, little Easter bunnies and things like that. And I remember as a child that my mother, around Easter time, that she would make these huge chocolate Easter bunnies and paint them, and then she would put them in a plastic wrapping with ribbon, and she would give these as gifts to my other family or to people, friends. So that is for me, what symbolizes for me what is Cape Town is this interconnection, this, even though we didn't celebrate Easter, that we would participate in Easter in some shape or form.
Yeah. And just for context, where did you grow up?
In Grassy Park.
Okay. Represent.
Yeah.
How about you, Fatima?
I think my favorite memory growing up when I was born in Manenberg in Court was, even though we were poor and there was, all these negative things happening around us, somehow everyone got fed. Like I write in my book, there were days where you just take, the corsi of the bread, and you put condensed milk on, and that's a meal. And the tea was already used how many times, no? How many times? Then we say flow tea. But it was flow tea because that was all that was there. It had to stitch. But somehow that sense of community in the court, hidden away from the rest of the world, somehow people found a way to feed each other. And everyone's home was everyone's kitchen. And if Auntie Teresa don't have food, that's all right. Next door is cook, we're going to sort you out, right? Just like that. And I think it's not just for us. I think it happened all over the world.
And there's a recipe in the book here. There are many that speak to Langso kos.
Langso schools.
Yes, and I think maybe I would like you to tell us a little bit about that, Tazneem. But that's what I'm getting here from this particular recipe called lentil and beef curry that your sister has shared in your book, and you dedicated to your mom. And if you don't mind, I just would read what you said, because there are literally 10 pieces of lamb, and you're serving 8 to 10 people. There's half a kilogram of lentils cooked. I'm not sure if this is going to help for you to see. Of course, when you purchase a copy just now, if you don't have one already, you will see what I mean. And you say here, we always mention my late mom in our food stories, as she played the most pivotal role in how we cook today. But this dish holds a special place in my heart, as it was the last meal she cooked minutes before she passed away. I remember the pot was still warm, and we arrived at the family home. She had died suddenly, no warnings, no sickbed. She was very fond of making food that could feed many, and this dish was one of them. That evening, after her funeral, the pot of lentil food stood on the stove. We donated the pot of food to one of the families who attended that we knew was struggling at the time. She would have wanted that. And I think just this ties in so well to this idea of food that can feed many, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
I can tell you, but I know she can make it much better than I can. A langsaus kos is basically, it's food that caters for many people, unexpected guests, for example. In my home, and the way I grew up is that when you cook a pot of food, you don't just cook for your immediate family. There's always people that might arrive on your doorstep. There might be something that happens. So you always need to kind of cater for the unexpected. Yeah. And a langsaus is something that can be, it can stretch far. So if more people arrive, you can maybe add something just to make it a little bit more.
I've always found this fascinating, and it's really particular to, of course it could be happening in all homes, but in marginalized cultures where, no matter how poor, you're always catering for that unexpected guest, the aunt who may arrive, the neighbor who may be hungry, the man who's repairing something around the corner. When we say we are what we eat, and for those of us working in the deeper recesses of food, like curating and cooking or television, writing, it really holds true. But what do you think are some of the things or the misconceptions or even things that you find interesting from outsiders looking in to the food?
For me, what always fascinated me was that people just assume in a Cape Malay kitchen we only make Cape Malay food, which is just far from the truth. Those are traditional meals. And we love Italian. I love sushi. Because every meal from across the world tells a story. And I'm interested in it, so of course I'll be interested in the food. And we make all that, and it's available to you all over Cape Town, so you're going to want to eat it. So when you come to my house, you may expect kusistas, but I'm making, croissants.
And what about this idea? We've been speaking about this before, because I've also fallen in this trap over the years and have to rectify and learn as I met more Cape Malay people and actually have been eating in their homes. The idea that there's this prevalent sweetness. There's a lot of sweetness, but a sweetness in a curry, for example. Where does this come from?
I think, we have that innate desire to create a meal from our ancestors, really. That's been passed on not by paper or by word of mouth. It's in our blood. But we want that sweetness and that mix of sweet and salt in our meals. It comes from all over our grandmother and our great-grandmother. So when we throw in a little sugar in the just saying, a little bit of vinegar, and then we create that perfect balance. So when you eat it, you wonder why does this thing taste different from other curries or other food? It's that little bit of sweetness that we throw in, an extra bit of love.
So, for the longest time, the media, well, that's, including the writers, have been punting Cape Malay. And, we know that the term is an ideological construct, and I'm using it just for the sake of familiarity, because I see you're very clear here in your book where you call it, you refer to Cape, and the food is rooted here. But for the longest time, we have been speaking about this particular cuisine as the defining cuisine of the Cape. And it does have very, very deep roots. I mean, we're looking at over 350 years based in slavery, the exiles. We're looking at the slave route. We're looking at the spice route. We're looking at the roots of colonialism here. So it makes sense that this has become quite distinctive and in its own. But one of the things that we don't always see, we see the connection to the East, but not often that open connection or the open mention of the fact that this food is rooted in Africa. And as you know, as you may know, it was only in 1995 when Cass Abrahams wrote Cass Abrahams Cooks Cape Malay, this book, Food from Africa, that there's this mention and this, it's almost a pride that the food does originate here. Tazneem, I wonder if you would be willing to, if you'd like to comment on that.
So I think the reason that is obviously historical, the pencil test is alive and well in our memories and now we connect to places. So people were taught inherently to disassociate themselves from Africa because that is on the racial scale that was seen as lower than. So obviously, people tended to go to their European roots, their Dutch so-called uncles or German uncles and so on and so forth. So there is that inherent self-hate, which is why people would rather not associate themselves with where we actually come from. So we are from Africa, we are from everywhere. We've been global for as long as we've been here.
Yeah, and it was only until 1988 actually that the first Cape Malay cookery book was published by a Cape Malay author, the late Feldella Williams, and she writes the book in the third person. So it's very clear that she and her publishers were aware at that stage that she was writing for an audience from the outside looking in. And she kept some of the things neutral. But if you look at that in the span of time, 1988 was the first time somebody from the community had autonomy and was able to write their own stories. That is a long time. That means that for this great period of time, and we look at some of the authors who are considered quite, both prolific and great, like Leopold and the infamous I.D. du Plessis, who was the colored minister of affairs between 1930 and 1962. They had quite an opportunity to craft the narrative. And so now we're seeing things change with books coming out from Fatima, for example, and a slew of other writers who can help to change this narrative. The other fascinating thing for me, Abby, is that when we look at a dominant cuisine presenting itself, but we don't necessarily see the cuisine of indigenous people and black folks appear in the media, appear vibrantly on Bree Street. And here we are at the, literally the tip of Africa. Why do you think that is?
I think we haven't actually claimed our space in the culinary space ourselves. So I won't blame it on anyone else. We are the ones that need to take charge. We are the ones that need to be the voice about our food, because that's where we actually tell our stories through our food. So that's what I've actually embarked on in the past couple of years when I started taking on this journey, that we will tell our own story through our own food and present it in its own bright and colorful way in the diversity that it presents. So it's our duty. We need to step up.
And can you tell members of our audience a little bit about what you're doing at Forum Kasi Kitchen?
So, Formed Culture, it's a restaurant in Khayelitsha which started in 2014 when I took part on MasterChef South Africa. I'm a dental technologist by profession, and I love the profession, and I never thought I would actually leave it after 17 years in the profession. But when I took part on MasterChef South Africa, I told myself that I'm going to use food as a tool to make a difference. And I'll be the voice through our food. So that's just in a nutshell what it is about, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would be really wonderful if people who are pioneers like yourself can also set the path for others to move your business to the township where everyone says success is having a restaurant in town is quite a bold move.
Actually, I would like to add on that. That was a conscious decision that we had to make, that we will open this restaurant in the township. We are now sitting at the world's best 30 restaurants. Mm-hmm. If we were in the city, it would have been a world's best in the city, like any other restaurant in the city. And we felt that, you know what, we need to actually balance the landscape, and this has to happen in the township. If we want to fix South Africa, we have to do the work ourselves.
Yes, so the big question in a nutshell, Fatima, what is the food of the Cape?
I said earlier,
yeah.
Specifically, I think the food of the Cape is our journey so far, and it's going to evolve with our next chapter. And what we're making now, traditional food, is what happened in the past.
Yes.
It's our story on the plate.
Yes.
And that's why when anyone comes to me with a plate of food, I'll never shun it. I'll never say anything bad about it because it's their story. And that is what the Cape is all about. It's just our stories finally becoming one. And that is why it's so important to share. Mm-hmm. And people say, Fatima, you're sharing all your recipes on Facebook. You're going to make money. And then I say, my intention is for that. It's like you said, to make a difference to food. And that's the beauty of Cape Town.
You were also saying a little earlier about a part of this journey is to document the story, and maybe there's been a combination of reasons why we didn't do it. I mean, we all know that there are just really scant records of our histories for many reasons, but now people have an opportunity to do that, and that is what you're doing.
Yes. Definitely. I think, we all have elders in our family that has passed on already. And we sit and we wish that, we sat down and ask them more about them. Because everything I want to know, I have to know, really go look for people to go ask it. And yet I have my aunties and grannies and all the uncles here at my beck and call, and I never asked it. So I'm literally going now to the places and to the people and just finding out and documenting their stories. Because they are the walking archives, if you think about it. And we're not going to let that pass and make the same mistakes like before. We are documenting it for sure.
So I know, Tazneem, we're going to get to your thesis, which is fascinating, and I, for one, will be championing the arrival of this in a book format for all of us to enjoy and digest at some point. So expect irritating WhatsApps to keep flooding your box. But so on this note of archiving, because part of what you did was you had to speak to people, and we're very lucky to still have Rashad Pandey, who is credited as one of, if not the creator of The Gatsby. But can you tell us a little bit about that, the process for you of speaking to these people? What was it like?
So for my thesis, what I did consciously was that there was this archive, this well-documented archive of white bread production, right? But on the other hand,
the ice.
on the other hand, there was this oral history available in the people that are making the food, in the takeaways, people that are consuming the food. And I wanted to kind of see how these narratives intersect with each other. Because I think people like Rashad Pandey and mothers and fathers, grandmothers, they don't feel the need to document because they have it in their head. So it was very important to do oral histories, interview people, speak to them, hear what they have to say, because essentially people are experts of their own taste. So they will tell you, no, this Gatsby is better than that one, they make it like this, they know when ingredients are changed. So people know their food and what they like and what they don't like, and they don't need to go to university to be qualified in their own taste. So,
Indeed.
yeah.
And we were speaking about this disappearance of primary sources, the disappearance of the people who are the closest to these dishes. And we are very lucky in the sense that there are still some of them around to tell the story. They often don't like the questions about why. But I think that's so important for us to continue this kind of work, but also to encourage other people who, maybe someone in the audience is doing this, or you're researching in this field, but to reach out to the people, to reach out beyond just what exists in the research archives, but to speak to the people on the ground. It may also be the last opportunity we have, in many cases, to do that and to document that. But, speaking about food in this manner, there's also a danger that we can be reduced to our food. And Habiba Badaroon covers this in her work when she speaks about the Cape Malay cook, seen as a jolly figure preparing a table groaning with exotic foods. And in this way, the cook's humanity is stripped by lending greater weight to the food, but not the person. But Fatima, you were saying earlier that you're reclaiming that in a different way.
I do, because my memory of my mom and grandmother is the total opposite. They brought themselves first to the table. They brought their person, they wouldn't put in a corner or in a box. So when I look back now and I think of my late mother, yes, I do think of the food, but I think of her. I never think of her as someone that was stripped from her humanity. Actually, her humanity actually came through in her food and her stories and the way she taught us and reared us. So it really depends on your own upbringing, what your perception is. A lot of people think like I just cook and fold samosas all day, which is not the case. I told him earlier I love hip hop and I can rap.
So now this portion of the panel.
And that is what I'm trying to show, that people can, you can broaden your mind. And if you can do that just looking at me the rest of the panel here, you can do it in your own life as well.
Yeah, and I think also being able to tell your own story instead of just having it, told for you, as it has been until 1988. And then it was this big gap till 95. And then slowly, only now, that, more and more writers of color are being allowed to tell you. Because, I know that there are many who wanted to, but have been knocking on doors that just don't open, or just waiting patiently and the windows close. So it's just so wonderful, I think, that we can, and we as the readers as well, need to encourage this and to encourage the publishers to keep allowing these stories to live. And the only way we can do that, of course, is to support the readers and to buy their books and comment about them and keep this alive, So that's something that we need to also really think about, that the narrative we have the power to change the narrative. Abby, and that's also what you're doing. I know you were thinking about a book as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, I just started now to organize my recipes because there's quite a lot of them. And yes, I am thinking about a book, but I would also not like it to be a book about the food and the recipes. I would love to actually be a book about the personality behind it. I always say that, when I cook, most of the times I'm thinking about my mom, because that's where we have the best memories, in the kitchen. And it's about me expressing myself. My husband always say that, Abi, you're an artist first. So what you are doing on a plate is actually your artwork. I sometimes complain that I don't get time to draw. I want to have time. I want to be on my easel. He says, but you're doing it on the plate. So there is actually a personality behind that plate of food. So with a book, I would love to see, you look at these people. It's not about the recipes and how you can actually replicate it at home and cook the same thing. But if you know the path that person has been through, you actually become part of that. It's a story. It's emotional.
Now, speaking of replicating recipes, you said something very interesting to us earlier about why, even if Fatima shares her, because Fatima brought us a whole of Romany creams a little earlier, homemade ones, and she also brought some for the staff where we were sitting. But she said, Fatima, you can share your recipe with us, and that's wonderful, but it'll never taste the same.
It never tastes the same. So in June, I was in London. I attended an exhibition which the title says Food Larger Than the Plate. A very interesting part of it was about the fact that we carry bacteria with us. And when you make food with your own hands, but if you look in our processes, most of our food, you have to touch it. If you marinate that meat, you must touch it. You don't work with gloves. Because when you do that, you actually pass on, we call it soul. We always say, oh, the food has soul. I mean, a lot of black food, we call it, this food is soulful.
Yeah.
But it's actually part of us that is in the food. That's why it will never taste the same. So I think what's important, if you get to know the personality behind that, you know you pass the same energy into it in your own food that you actually prepare.
So the bacteria, I'm not sure if you're freaked out by that or encouraged, but I'll leave that with you. So Tazneem, in your master's thesis called Producing and Consuming the Wembley Whopper and the Superfisheries Gatsby, Bread Winners and Losers in Athlone, 1950 to 1980. You cover this fascinating history into the genealogy of bread in South Africa as a means of biopower, which I learned means power over people. It was wielded by a white supremacist government. And yet, in these margins and in these little pockets, the Gatsby and the Whopper, created by their communities, start to thrive. You know, I was just wondering, why do you think the Gatsby is endearingly popular in the Cape?
I think that it reflects some kind of shared experience because, like I've said before, the Gatsby starts to become popular at a very particular point in South African history, and that's after the forced removal. So something about the construction, the cut-in for the community, the sharing of a Gatsby there's something to be said about how you eat it, the method of preparation in relation to what has happened to people being forced out of their homes, relocated to the periphery of Cape Town. And it's maybe some kind of reconstitution of home and home food. Because a Gatsby, the flavors of a Gatsby is a lang sauce, is a huiskos flavor in a sandwich that can be transported easily. Yeah. So also people are traveling a lot longer to work and so on. So there's less time in the kitchen. So takeaways in that form start to become popular. And it's a way for people to continue to share food with each other. Yeah. So I think that's why it's so
and really fascinating when you read it against the history of what was happening at that time, as you mentioned, where it's Group Areas Act, where it's Intermarriage Act, where it was Bantu education at one stage. Yeah. All of this is happening, and the state has prior to this invested a lot in terms of science to grow this wheat, because it was so difficult to grow wheat in the Cape, you know. And it's just really interesting, the emergence of white bread and white supremacy at the same time as a means of control as well. Because, you know, one of the big problems was feeding the miners, as you mentioned. And, you know, they're suffering from different diseases. And, of course, if you don't feed them well, they won't be productive. It wasn't just simply care for well-being.
Exactly.
And so the diet of bread, sugar, and tea emerges. And Abby, you've got some memories of Gatsby as well.
Yeah, my memories when I was in high school actually come to the library in town. I mean, with my friends, that's the meal we will have, a Gatsby, and we share. We always look forward to, once we're done with our studies, we're going to sit at the parade and have our Gatsby. So it's so interesting that, you know, that people took something that would have actually broken their spirits and made joy out of it. And for us, while studying and you're looking at this meal, because I know that's one thing we look forward to after studies, that we're going to sit down and share this meal together, probably like a group of 5 to 7 girls together. Yes.
Well, it was the length of an arm, right?
Yeah. So it's also, just to add that there's also like a kind of defiance in a Gatsby. You know, it's not exactly the most healthy meal. There is a layer of salads. But
you mean the iceberg lettuce?
Yeah. So it brings people together in spite of, in that time, the state trying to tear people apart. So eating together is something that is very intimate and it's very,
Yeah, and you know, as I mentioned, everything that you uncover here with things that, you know, I was reading this and I read it a second time. It was like a light bulb moment. It was just so fascinating because we ourselves, and this is the thing I also always fear, that these things that we should know do get locked up in silos. You know, they do, for whatever reason. You know, the funding is in the academic sphere, or the need to explore it for whatever reason is there. But it's so nice for us lay people to connect and to understand and to you know, as we piece this history of ours, to also kind of see it in context with what was really going down. I think we're just richer for it. I would love for you to read to us the closing paragraph of chapter 3 of your thesis.
Okay, I'm going to warn you, it is a little academic, so bear with me. The historical meanings of bread in all its variations shifted contextually as a source of starchy stamina for a dignified black labor force to a trophy of white superiority, mastery, and self-sustainability. The genealogy of wheat bread production from the 19th to the 20th century reflected an emergence and proliferation of state-racialized biopower. Thus, bread was marked by an institutional biography of biopolitical strategies that seized, managed, and exerted influence over the taxonomy of everyday life. Reading bread with and against the grain in this way gives insight into the insidious administration of race in the food that we eat.
Definitely lots of food for thought. So since we started speaking about wheat and bread, so yes, bread has remained actually quite dominant in our diet. And when I speak about bread, I mean that the non-nutritious, commercially produced type is it's quite prevalent. But if we, is it? Okay. But if we look at wheat, maize, rice, these are also starches that are prevalent and popular in our diet. So to reclaim that, I thought perhaps we could look at the starch-based foods that embody the soul of Cape Town. So Abby, do you want to share something that you remember eating based in starch that, you know, reminds you of home?
It would be umngqusho,
Okay.
which is samp, and pap. And it will be umqa in our case, Xhosa, which is pap cooked with butternut in it. And I have fond memories around that.
And the thing to remember is, you know, all of us who are trying, when we know the science now, right? Carbs are going to kill us. And we're all aspiring to this Banting-style diet. But the bottom line is, for many of our families, starch was the soul of that meal because it really fed us, you know. Often we say, like, there's no you don't feel any satisfaction if there's no potato and rice on that plate with the curry, you know. So, and I noticed in your book, for example, you've got the prawn akni, but you also have the pilchard akni. So it is very possible that, you know, on those lean days, we have that starch feeding us and the protein that's more affordable. Do you have any memories to share about yummy starchy?
There are so many, but I think what really stands out for me is our home was open to everyone. There was never knock cars in front of our house. Our mom's door was always unlocked, and everyone was welcome. And because of this, there wasn't always a lot of food, and she'd always be giving. So obviously there's days where there are like 30 people in the house. Everyone's hungry. So she'd make a pot of food, throw extra water in, you know, lamb sauce. And she'd make a lot of rice. And there wasn't enough plates, so she would just take the dexter of the pot, you know, and she would dish. But somehow everyone ate. So the rice made it go far, because, you know, it's cheap, it's economical, and it fills you up. So that's probably, for me, it's always the best memory when it comes to starches.
And acne can go both ways. It can be super fancy and you're not. How about you, Tazneem?
So as a child, I grew up next to my granny's sister, also known as Granny. And she was very traditional. I also learned many swear words from her as a child, but she was very... so I mean, we would go there and she would lay a table and you get a plate of food and we would eat rice with everything. So rice, my funniest memory is eating rice with spaghetti. I don't know if anybody has ever... You know it? Why? So, I think spaghetti came in at a certain point, but, it must be eaten with rice. So, yeah, so we would eat rice, especially lunch and supper would be made at home, and it would be with some kind of either sticky rice, yellow rice, but there must be a...
Rice anchoring the meal.
Yeah.
Abby, you had started a little earlier telling us about some of the work you're doing. So I'm very curious about the work that the three of you are doing to unpack your culture. You want to maybe just continue on that thought? Because you travel a lot representing the country.
Yes, part of the work I'm doing is to tell our South African story through our food, our heritage, our culture, and the diversity of it. So with the food that I present is our South African food, which very interestingly so is the ingredients you find across all cultures, be it Afrikaans, colored, Indian, black, and we have the same ingredients. But what I figured was we're not celebrating much of our food as South Africans. You don't see most of it even in our own restaurants here. You get travelers coming from outside to visit South Africa, which is in Africa, and yet they don't get African food. But South Africa doesn't have African food, has South African food, which represents all these different cultures. So the food that we serve at my restaurant, you would notice that it's got an influence of different cultures in it because that's what we know.
Great. And how about you, Tazneem?
Sorry, what is the question?
About the work that you're doing. You did a wonderful bread exhibition, and that sort of like tries to unpack some of these things that we're speaking about, that we just covered. So the work that you're doing to unpack the culture and food and get people on board.
Well, I think for me the first step was just to take our food seriously in an academic writing, and not just like, some folklore little write-up, but as a serious, our food as a serious archival resource. From there, trying to look at other ways of, what can we do with flour? How can we decolonize flour? And what can we do? So my whole mantra at the moment is just trying to figure out innovative ways of baking bread.
Okay, so on that note of bread, I just want to mention that Jade of Food Jams and Sota has prepared foods to tie in with this talk today. So I believe there is a healthful whole grain bread as well, and Ruchi and curry and Fult Fat Cook, and it's at the Homecoming Center, so please go on there as well to support after this. So back to programming as regular. I would love us to chat about cultural appropriation. The problem is, apart from the fact that cultural appropriation is a problem, we don't have sufficient time. But, the example that comes to mind, of course, is the Gatsby incident that Food Network put out this video, and I just want to make it's a little disclaimer that we know the problem is not the person that they featured. She's talented, she's good, she did make reference to the origin of the dish. But it's a fact that when people who are often voiceless and who have not sufficiently been represented get talked over, that is a problem. So Tazneem, maybe you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of voices that could have been spoken to. There are plenty of people that they could have used for that specific segment. But to take some, for example, Rashad Panda isn't the only one that's making a Gatsby, right? There are many places opening up, selling Gatsbys, but nobody has a problem with them. Because why? They are in the communities that the Gatsby is supposed to be served to. There's an understanding, there's a shared experience. You can't go and take something that belongs within a community that reflects a particular experience and then make, spinach and fruit chutney, whatever you put on there, you're robbing the food form of its actual heritage.
So I think it was Aidan Thomas who really, took this very seriously, and I suppose as one should. And I think one of the things that came out there was that if you gave the spotlight to the people in the community, Mr. Pandey and others who created it, and you did a sidebar, featuring these other healthy takes with the ciabatta bread and the spinach and stuff. That's acceptable. So maybe we can speak about appreciation. We speak about culinary appropriation and culinary appreciation. Because Fatima, you have spoken about the fact that if someone takes your recipe in a fine dining restaurant, you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Because I always say,
bacteria.
Yes. That's why I share my recipe so freely. I want everyone to experience my story. That's the whole thing. And coming back to the Gatsby, I must say this, I must add this. When that happened, I was really hurt. I was hurt because for me personally, it felt like over the years, we feel inside us that so much was taken from us, that my brain was saying, please not this too. Please not this too. Come on.
What's very interesting, though, is that how that is overridden, constantly. We never have an opportunity to claim these things and be seen as the authors and representing our own foods.
Exactly.
And then when it's taken over with a little, oh, come on. You mean trying to say that I'm not allowed to make this food? Of course you're allowed to make the food. But the point we were making was give attention to the voices who exist in this community still, who created these dishes, and then go on and say, okay, I'm going to do my version, and so on. So that was very short-sighted of them. And I think, from what I gather, they did express quite a bit of regret, but it's a bit too late. But it's not the only instance, of course. But as I mentioned, we could speak about appropriation for a while, but we're going to... Oh, Abby, did you want to say something?
I just want to say one thing. I think we are at a point where everyone has a voice now, and we also need to step up and tell our own stories and, write about our own stories and through food. Food is political, like you opened with the statement. So we also need to take a stand and be the voices. We can't always be taking a back seat. So the question is, what are we doing about that?
And that's really another important thing to mention, because we always speak about, okay, this is the case, this is what's happened so far in history, but then step two, what are we doing? And I think, Abby, you engage with that, well, all of you actually engage with that very actively, because you are doing in your spaces to educate, to create, to share. And that's also really important. I am very well aware that we are running out of time. And so on this note, I would like Fatima to have a look at something lovely that was written by Athol Williams. And I think he wrote this. The first two paragraphs of his foreword was written for you and Khadija.
Yeah. When I opened this book, I still can't believe. That two twins, obviously. That did this, and anything is possible. Yeah, and he wrote, we are echoes. We are echoes of our mothers, our fathers have come and gone, like waves of this vast Indian Ocean. We are echoes of the prayers, the songs, the genes, near and infinite, held firmly by hands of hope. This, our hearts reply, this is who we are.
Thank you. So at this point, we would like to invite you to ask any questions of the panelists that you may have. Any burning questions? Okay, so we have someone in the back there. I think they're going to pass you a mic.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello, hi, I'm Yazid. Hello, Tazneem.
Hi.
Salam. I just want to add something about the experience of the Gatsby, just the economics of it. Like growing up as friends, you'd go to a shop, you can't all afford a single burger or a single sandwich. You put your money together and you can all eat. So there's also like the economic thing, and just because you have money now or more money now doesn't mean like you still don't like the Gatsby. It's still like lekker, right? And then another thing that's also interesting for me about food in the Cape is, especially in the Muslim community, there's like a spirituality around it. So, for example, people always like say Bismillah, and obviously they eat halal food. But also, for me, the thing was that there was also understanding of blessings. Like, when you go to someone's house, they will say, it's for the barakah, like, eat something for the blessings. No matter how hungry you are, if you go to a Muslim house and there's food, just eat. I mean, no matter how much you've eaten, never deny the food, just like say, okay, cool, I'll eat something for the blessings. So I love the spirituality around food, and especially at funerals, like you feed people at a funeral, that's like seen as a blessing as well. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yazid, hi. You won't believe it, but it's as if you were in Tazneem's brain, because we have previously just discussed this, and you actually wrote those very words. You said, eat it for the blessings. So thank you for that. Anyone else?
There were other stuff that was imported, but people were starving because culture is the shima. A shima is the food, and so that for me was a very big insight. So I want to ask now, even though we eat food because it's lekker, we also eat food because what goes in our bodies also serve us and make us and create us. And so how are we going to deal with the fact that the starch and the slab chips and, the French fries, the stuff that we have been eating is sometimes not good for us. There's a lot of oil in our curries. And we do sit now with a situation where there's a lot of diabetes, there's a lot of hypertension, there's a lot of food-related diseases in our communities. And even though we don't want to let go of what's lekker, how do we bring in the healthy part and still embrace the what's lekker? Thank you.
Anyone want to answer?
First, if you look at food, anything has to be done in moderation. If you go back, I was born in the 70s. We grew up in this kind of food you just described now, and we lived healthy lives. Most of the time, you will only find meat on a Sunday. That will be the time you eat meat. 6 days of a week, we're eating our starches and vegetables. So most of the time, our food was actually vegetable-based, was vegetarian food, only until Sunday comes where you will have, obviously, your fried chicken and everything else. That would be like your 7-color plate. That's like your norm in South Africa. But again, it's all in moderation. I look at parents, brothers, everyone, they die at a later stages in life, not because of food. And that's the food they ate all the time. I think what's important is everything in moderation, but what's important is, like you asking this question about culture around food. We tell our stories through our food, so we can't dismiss it completely. It will always be around. Grains are not harmful for you. The maize, that is South African basic staple, is not harmful to us, but as long as we eat in moderation.
Yeah, it's also how you prepare it.
Mm-hmm.
It's also
change things. Like when you use a lamb, for instance, you don't have to add oil. It's a fatty meat, like for instance. And fat of meat is actually, it does have its health benefits.
It's healthy.
It's a natural fat. It is how we prepare the food that changes the whole dynamic of your meal.
So I think, I don't want to contribute too much here, but we can't also discount the proliferation of the Western diet, which has really taken over here. In fact, I've been speaking to Africans who are not from South Africa, and they're like, the diet we eat here is not an African diet. It has changed so much because of that. I think we may have time for one more quick question. I think it was the lady, I think. Okay, great. So the gentleman with the shirt, red shirt. Okay. It's coming to you, Sam.
Thanks. My question would be around, we're talking about the Cape food or Cape Town food. The ladies from the colored community particularly, are they including the families of the farm workers at the wine estates, for instance, in Stellenbosch, French Hoek, Because what I find very interesting is that many a times we go to those spaces and we go to the chef, we exclude them. So I doubt if, or I haven't seen any writing about their history with food. Food has got so much impact or in terms of the economy of the Western Cape, but they are completely forgotten.
Good point. Thank you. Fatima, you always speak about the idea of, well, we'll be speaking particularly Cape Malay, not being a geography. Do you want to maybe, we have a few minutes, do you want to maybe start?
Yeah, on that basis, I've always been told like you have to be, well, some people say, you have to be from Gurkha or specifically to represent Cape Malay. And I constantly have to remind people that Cape Malay is not a geography, it's a way of life. And that's why I try to not mention Cape Malay and rather to say Cape, because then we are all included in the journey. That's why what you were saying about documenting the stories, it's the same concept. If I've invited my amazing friends here to go to Hamburg and let's go document people there. We have a chance now. We make big errors, not errors really. It didn't happen before. There's nothing there to show what happened 100 years, 200 years ago from ourselves, like you always mention.
Mm-hmm.
But what we can do now is change that. So for your interest and mine, maybe you can go and go find out and write about it. Even if you post it on Facebook, we document it.
Thank you so much. So on that note, we have a lot more we would love to have discussed with you, but that is us, and we would like to thank Open Book's headline sponsor, Leopard Leap Wines, and also a reminder to support Open Book School Literary Project. Books and vouchers are available for purchase at the satellite shop at the Homecoming Center, which I know you're all going to, because Fatima is going to be there to sign books just now. Jay Duval, as I mentioned, has prepared some classic Cape bites, roti and curry, fat cook, and some wholesome bread for you to enjoy and purchase. I would also like to thank Mervyn and Frankie, the organizers behind Open Book, for really, really celebrating and embracing the topic of food this year, and you would have found it appearing in various ways. It's such an important aspect of the culture and such a tool for understanding, truly. So thank you so much to them, and of course to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for giving us so much of yourselves.